C-I-T-Y-H-U-L-L-C-I-T-Y. That's all we need.
And we're back. Hello and welcome to the second part of our season review for the 2022-2023 season. I'm your host, Alex, and with me I have Dan. How are you, Dan?
Yeah, good. It's good. It's good to be back. Be good to look to reminisce and reflect and look back at the season that was.
That's it. It's been a couple of weeks. Caught our breaths, enjoyed the playoffs. We now know all 24 teams that we will, 23 other teams, I should say, we'll be playing next season. And we've also got Brad with us. How are you, Brad?
Good, thanks, gents. Thanks for having me.
No problem. It's good to see you. It's been a couple of weeks, a couple of month or so since we've had you on, so it's good to have you back on. What have you made of, I guess, how I'll start with you, Brad. What have you made of how the season wrapped up and how it all came together?
Oh, yeah, I mean, how long have you got? It's the typical Hull City story, isn't it? You go from optimism to new manager to if we can not get relegated, that'd be great, to hang on a minute, we could make the playoffs, to back to mid-table, and in the end we finished pretty much where we thought, well, we would start, and that is somewhere out of relegation and just enough to not have to stress the last couple of weeks. But I think probably the best thing is we've got a new owner. Clearly, the regime, whatever you want to call it, is different, and obviously, especially those on the ground that go to match day, believe the club's in a better place, and that's probably the best measurement of all of it.
Yeah, that's it. And Dan, I guess, with the manager coming in, former player, solid foundation, I suppose, as we head into this off season.
Yeah, I think it's been sort of like to carry on what Brad was saying about, the new regime, Ilajali and Kessler and those guys that have come in and into those leadership roles within the club really seem to be just about getting all the decisions right so far in terms of, our match day attendances grew and grew through the season to the point where the last few home games were, all at or around 20,000, fans at the KCOM, which is sensational. Good to have it, rocking and rolling again after a few lean years. I mean, COVID didn't help, but there were issues before and after that. So, it's good to see the attendance has grown. I think realistically, that's the benchmark of where the club is at. Really, if people are willing to pay money to go and watch the football, then I think that we're in a good place.
Yeah, absolutely. Something I didn't touch on yesterday with Logan, but there is also the cup competitions, League Cup and FA Cup, knocked out in the first rounds of both. Does that, sometimes we like to go on a little bit of a cup run. This was actually probably one of our worst seasons in terms of cup performances. Did that bother you at all, Dan?
To an extent, the cup runs are good. It's good to be on that ride as well, but I think really those cup runs were indicative of sort of how we were playing and who we had in charge at the time. I think we have observed and commented on the big shift in mentality and performance, in essentially the two halves of the season. The pre-World Cup and post-World Cup, or, pre-Rosy and in the Rosy era. So I think it's just sort of one of those circumstances where it sort of didn't work out for us. I still think we had the players where we could have done better, but I think realistically, with everything that happened, ensuring survival was really more important. And I think we've seen it before. The cup run, can be great, but can also be potentially a bit of a distraction from what might be your larger goal for the season.
Yeah, absolutely. Fair enough. And Brad, I guess with the way we started the season, you're sort of saying there we sort of started off like a house on fire. Then the regime under Shotta kind of fell apart somewhat with a pretty poor run of results, leading to his sacking just before the Luton game. I think it was the morning of the Luton game, which was quite wild timing. But it's a hard one, I suppose. Coming into the preseason, we were sort of looking at a top half finish potentially, reasonably happy in the end with a 15th place finish. But there were points in the season where, both at the start of the season and then under Rosenia, where we were somewhat dreaming of the playoffs. Are you frustrated that we didn't make more of a fist of it, or are you just happy to sort of reset, get a good foundation for next season?
Oh, look, it's a really good question, mate, because if you look at it in parts, you can see how frustrating we were. If you break the season into 3 parts, for example, like you said, start well, pretty soon we're sacking the manager, which is never a good sign because it generally means the performances aren't there. And then you have sort of this almost ground out series of results right through to the end that meant that typically Rosenia's done exactly what he was brought in to do, was to make sure we don't go down. At the same time, though, you sort of feel like, well, hang on a minute, with a new owner and a bit of money here and there and, let's say, a cleaning of the house, you would expect that there'd be a bit of a resurgence there that means the whole club gets a lift. But I think overall, let's face it, we are mid-table of the second largest comp in the country, which is probably whereabouts we should be. We all have grandeur of being a Premier League club, but there's still a lot of clubs in the Championship a lot bigger than us, and they're still trying to get their act together. And I still think probably, if anything, it's more about the stability factor. The one thing I did like, and I'm probably going to be statistically incorrect, but it just felt like when Rosenia came in, he changed that mindset a little bit along the lines of, we're going to be hard to score against. And I know obviously teams scored against us and we lost games and so on, but it was almost like under Shotter, it was all about excite, score, see what we can do. Whereas, as we know in the Championship, that's good for the first half of the season, but when it's 4 games in 12 days in the middle of winter, you're not going to do that at some of these lowly midweek games. You need to be able to grind out results. And probably the only thing that I think is a positive is that we could probably have a good look at where we finished in the table and say, yeah, that's true, we finished midway, and is that great or not? But we didn't actually lose truckloads of games.
Yeah, I think it was probably
I think
Bristol City was the only arguably bad loss. I think we only lost maybe 3 or 4 games.
Yeah, we technically we won or drew 30 games out of 46.
Yeah.
So that normally puts you in the top, at least in the top 10. It's just the fact that we didn't win enough of those 30 to get those extra points. But let's say Rosenia's there from the start of the season and we grind a result here or there, we're top 8, top 7. It's only a 2 or 3 goal game difference. And I think probably the thing that I did like was, although, yes, we weren't prolific scorers, we didn't leak either. I would have liked us to at least be in positive territory on the goal difference. But as we always said from the start, with Bowen going and so on in previous seasons, and then obviously KLP going, where are the goals going to come from? And that's probably the answer. We're a good side. We're just still a striker away from that top 6 or 7.
Yeah, I think goal difference is always going to be an issue with how far back we were starting with that negative goal difference. But I think we were maybe 3rd or 4th best defence in the division under Rosenia, which says a lot about how he transformed us. Dan, I want to touch now on, so we've released our retention list, obviously. A couple of players offered new deals. Alfie Jones getting a new, essentially 4-year deal. Doherty and Coyle getting their year extensions triggered. But also Callum Elder released from the club as the lone Australian. As I said to Logan, we haven't been without an Australian since before we signed Jackson Irvine, which would have been about 2017, so it's about 6-7 years. What were your thoughts initially on those 4 players, I suppose?
The Callum Elder one actually did kind of surprise me a little bit because, they must have something in play, like a plan in place there. There must be something happening because, they'd sent Fleming on loan basically saying, you're not doing it at the moment, and you're not going to get game time here. So he was behind Elder in the pecking order at some point. And I don't think that Greaves as a left back is a long-term solution. So there has to be something in play there. That one sort of, I mean, I guess time will tell whether how that plays out. But I think there must be a plan in place. There must be a player that they've either already spoken to or like have plans in place to bring in, because otherwise that just doesn't seem to make any sense to release the players that sit in essentially
The only left back,
like at one of our weaker like or positions where we lack depth is those wide defenders. So that was a bit odd. Happy with Doherty getting his year triggered. Happy enough with Coyle getting his year triggered. I think, I think having oh my god, brain fart. Christie come in, having Christie come in and take that the first team spot for a large chunk of that season, I think was almost exactly what Coyle really needed. Someone to guide him in that and push him along and push it, because I think when he did come in towards the end, I thought his performances were quite good, and he seemed to have improved and gone to another level. So I think depending on fitness and everything, that we might be okay next year. With those two, Doherty, I always like.
It'll be interesting with
the Jones. And the Jones one, I think, was just good. I think that exactly the kind of player who we really needed to be locking down and in that sort of position.
It seems like
the last few seasons has been sort of where we've constantly felt like we didn't just quite have enough there, and so to lock some of those players up for longer deals this year is good.
It seems like for the first time in a while, we're finally learning the lessons of extending contracts on these valuable players like McLaughlin getting a deal earlier, and now Jones. Doherty will be the interesting one. I was saying to Logan in the first part that the way that he was farewelling the fans at the end of the last home game, I wonder if it means that we've extended the deal in order to get a fee for him, and he's not necessarily staying at the club. It seems like Coyle, there might be a new deal in the works for a longer term stay, so that one will certainly be more interesting. Brad, what were your thoughts on these movements?
The Elder one surprised me for no other reason than realistically the last, whatever it would be, month or so, first team regular, left back, locked in, and like Dan said, we're not bereft of lots of options there, really. And it's sort of, there must be something there we don't know, because you can't tell me that Elder was on such a commanding salary that it's worth getting rid of him just to free up some wage. And not to mention that even though he is, technically he's a left back, we know he can really play in a wing back role if we had a back three as well. So he's got that midfield capability to him. So that was a surprise, I'll admit. The Jones one, great, had to lock it in, do it. And the options that Dan mentioned as well were great. Probably the only thing I think that obviously all of us are talking about from a retention perspective is what are we going to do at the top end around, scoring goals and basically becoming a defensive force that can counter and score goals, and that's obviously going to come down. I'd imagine at the top end, our wage budget's not actually going to give us truckloads of room unless we make some changes anyway.
Yeah, and of course, not mentioned, but Tyler Smith released, which I think we all knew would be basically a formality. Pelkas as well doesn't look like he's returning. So to your point about
something on social media the other day.
Yeah, I think it was
a farewell saying new journey ahead, sort of thing. So I think he was on pretty decent wages.
Well, I mean, I was going to say that, Dan. I don't know exactly how much, but it sounds to me, this is the rumour mill, of course, that he was getting paid like a good Premier League wage plus.
Yeah. Well, I think that's to do with potentially the money that's just being thrown around in Turkey. And so to get him to come, we sort of had to offer.
I think it was like 30 grand or something was what I heard. So. Which, if that was to be true.
Are you talking pounds?
Yeah. £30,000.
No, I heard it was
Or 25.
I heard it was about 60 Australian. Yep, is what I'd heard.
Yeah, right. Okay, yeah.
Which, when you compare that to, say, what two fans estimated to be on, then you're talking about paying that guy, Pelkas is anywhere between 50 to 75% more than two fan.
Yeah,
which is huge.
Which is crazy. And so you think
for a mid-table club, let's say, too.
Yeah. You see, when you talk about opening up the wage budget to a new forward or two, you think maybe Cynic goes, Pelkas has gone. There'd be a few others as well. I think we'll be looking to shift around. But it goes back to your point then on Elder, where I almost wonder if it's maybe the fact that Elder wanted to leave, because Elder might have said, I want to be starting at my age. I want to be starting matches every week. And I know that if I stay, I'll be a squad player. And he saw the writing on the wall, sort of in a way similar to what Honeyman and Smallwood might have done last summer, when they would have known we were getting Seri in, we're getting the Tufan in, we're getting these guys in who weren't going to let them start every week. That's all I can assume, because to your point, Brad, I mean, he was playing the last couple of games. We didn't really have another left back in the squad. So unless we're bringing in, you'd like to think, two left backs this summer, one to start and then one to challenge, assuming that Fleming doesn't come back in, it is a bit of a strange one. But we shall certainly say, hey, look, maybe a good segue into reflecting on our preseason predictions then, in talking about firepower up top. We can talk about the top goal scorer predictions. And Logan and I did pat ourselves on the back yesterday because we both went with Oscar as top goal scorer. Dan went with Ali, who did finish the season with, I think, the solitary goal. But we will say, in your defense, he was out for large chunks of the season with injury.
Yeah, freaking needs new knees and hamstrings, that boy. Jeez. All out. Did not do me any favors. To be fair, looked very dangerous for big, when he was playing. Just got into the box and was like a deer on ice skates, just all over the place, and couldn't put it in the net.
Yeah, not too bad from Ali. But then, Brad, I mean, you're sort of talking earlier about the firepower. The way that Oscar started his spell this season with us, with, I think, was it 7 goals in 6 games or something like that? I can't think of too many City forwards that have started quite that well.
No, and look, mate, I think that's where probably the talk of grandeur of going right up the table started, is you've got that ability to see someone who can, in pretty quick succession, some of those goals too. It wasn't just scoring one a week. He was banging them in from all sorts. But I think probably the thing is that, I mean, if you look at our top 2 or 3, I mean, I wouldn't know who our third or fourth goal scorer was, but Greaves was probably in our top 5.
Yeah,
and that's the problem. It's not necessarily that we've got someone who maybe is going to bang in 20. It's that our forwards are going to score 25 between them.
I have a feeling that Slater might have been our third top goal scorer.
Oh, so there you go.
Well, Oscar, then Tufan, then maybe Slater. Connolly got Slater. 2 in that. He got 2 or 3, because he got 2 in one game. Yeah. Which is, that's already up there in the most amount of goals. So,
yeah, I think that sort of sums it up a bit, if you like. And it's not to say, that's why you hang on to some of these decisions about who to keep or who to not. I mean, we talked about Honeyman for an example, and I mean, I'm on the record to say I was a big fan. I was more interested in what he set up than what he actually did goals-wise, but he'd still chip in with 4 or 5 a year, and he wouldn't be in our top 2 or 3. And I think that's still the thing where we fall down, is you're looking at our forwards saying, well, hang on a minute, even Oscar scores 13, but as a forward line movement, if you like, we don't crack past 25.
Yeah.
And realistically, in 40-odd games, we've got to be scoring really at the rate of about 1.5 to 2 goals a game to make sure you're in the top 6. And we're never going to get there unless we've got that second line of forward coming up to score double digits.
Yeah, Oscar with 13, Tufan 8, Slater 5, Greaves 4, Tyler Smith and Cyrus Christie with 3 each, which is pretty remarkable. Talking then most improved players, Dan, you said Doherty. I said two-fan, which I think the jury's sort of out on how you would define that as most improved. I'll get your thoughts on Doherty in a second, Dan, but I might start with you, Brad, on who you thought most improved player was, because Logan actually raised an interesting prospect last night, which I found hard to disagree with.
I know exactly who you're going to say because I've seen your run sheet.
No, that's a different. It wasn't Graves. It was someone else.
No, I was going to give an honourable mention to Greaves just for the pure amount of games he played, and he's still regarded as a young player. Not only that, but he looks pretty excited to run down that left-hand side and whip balls in and score goals, and probably added an extra dimension to his game that sort of lightened us more to what we might be able to see even in a better squad. But it's hard to say because realistically, Slater had such a good year
that's who Logan said.
He turned it up a notch, and it wasn't probably till the whole Player of the Year awards came out and I started actually having a read at a few things where I went, gee whiz, he was good. And last year, okay, he's a good player. We already knew that, but he went to sort of, you don't want to say team of the year status for the league, but he was in the top 30 or 40 players in the whole comp at a team that struggled its way to 15th. And you can't help but think that with a better side, he could even be slightly better. So I'm actually going to give it to Slater. I know that's boring because he's won all the awards anyway. But for me as well, he really stepped up in a fashion. I didn't think he honestly had that level in him, and it was great to see.
You sort of think in that, and I'll throw it to you, Dan, as well, and you can bring Doc into it as well, because Doc's, I think, a really good contrast to Slater, where you think there was that core of players that we signed in League One, and most of them have made that step up quite competently. And I think Doherty has to a large extent. But Slater's level of improvement compared to them just shows, I think, just how impressive Slater is. When you think your Coyle, your Doherty, even Jones, really, who also made that step up from League One with us, all have looked competent in a championship, but Slater's looked, sort of head and shoulders at times.
Yeah, I was just, as you guys were talking, I was thinking about Slater, when we got him and, what he's done for us and his performances. And lots of players sort of, they have a ceiling, and you can find where that is very quickly. They either cut it at championship or they don't or whatever. But Slater kind of feels like, and which is crazy, we paid $50,000 for him, but he's almost like a player that, not that he has limitless potential, but I'm still really yet to maybe see his ceiling, if you know what I mean. He just seems to be a player who can lift and rise to the challenge and to the occasion time and again, and keep just creeping those performance levels higher and becoming more and more instrumental. And the same as what Brad just said about Greaves being he's still considered a young player. I mean, Slater's in exactly the same bracket, really. They're similar age.
How old is he?
I think he might actually be younger than Greaves.
Yeah, they must be similar age. I'll just have
a
look at it.
Maybe a year, a little bit.
So Slater's 23, and Greaves must be 20. Oh no, Greaves is 22. Okay, so he's slightly
a year older. But yeah, so I think he his performances, and I think he has managed to make involvements throughout the season and in moments in games where they became crucial. Winning penalties. When we're locked at 0-0 late in the season for I think that 2-fan then puts away, and things like that. Just that earned us points through whether it was just sheer will and determination or what. But I think that's what you're really looking for, and you need more players who are going to be, either forging moments or making moments, in games across the season. And I think he did really step up to be that kind of a player. Yes, contrasting with Doc, who I really like him, and I really wanted him to come in and have a good year and get up to speed. And he by no means did he disappoint himself in the championship this season, but he did not really. I think he didn't rise to any to certainly to the level that I was hoping.
Got goal of the season at least.
Well, I mean that's something. Who got last season's goal of the season?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm going to guess LP, but I don't know. Yeah.
No,
but it's a really good point, Dan, just on what you're saying there. Sorry to interrupt you, mate.
Yeah, all right.
Doherty is like the guy that we thought is going to go on with it. The pedigree's there. This guy's a pretty well-oiled machine. He's just going to get better, and that's fine. Whereas I think with Slater, it was almost along the lines of, we knew he was good. I mean, he played a fairly decent length of time before this season at the club. But the key thing was, I don't know if I really looked at Slater as he will be in our first team and driving the bus, so to speak. And that's effectively what he's done. He's taken himself from a squad player to first 11 reasonably quickly. And I think that's what we expected Doherty to be the man to do.
It was actually Ryan Longman who got goal of the season last year for the goal against Everton. So he's still at the club. So maybe it isn't a cursed award. Well, look, maybe we'll round it off talking about who we all thought was the best summer signing. We'd predicted that it would be Seri, who I think was a pretty safe prediction at the time. And look, I think he's been pretty impressive. Logan went with Oscar. I'll start with you, Brad, in terms of reflecting on the signings that we made and who you think's performed best this season.
I suppose if you're defining signing, you're basically saying it's this season only, aren't you? Really, from the start of this season onwards, yeah. I think I probably find it hard to pick, but I'd probably go with Oscar only because I think he made us feel like we can sign someone, we're big enough and a good enough prospect that some of these guys would look at us as a career move. And that's really what we're after. We're always sort of saying that we want the next Premier League player to join us. And I just like the fact that when he signed, it showed really good. He really wanted to come. It wasn't like there was this to and fro of us trying to extract him out of a position. He really did want to come. So I'm probably going to say Oscar, but I think you could argue either way.
And how about you, Dan?
Yeah, look, an interesting one. I'm going to probably throw a little bit of a curveball at you with who I'm thinking. And I think Oscar and Seri are both great shouts. And I think probably what disappointed me with Oscar is he could not, I guess, inconsistency. A great start, but then really just big dry spells. I know there was a couple of injuries and some suspensions and things, but it just felt like he really trailed off. And I think it would be better for that. Next season, I expect that he'll be more consistent throughout the season, but it just felt like there were moments where we really needed him to be stepping up and carrying us, getting goals, and it just sort of wasn't falling in that middle and even late, before his whatever it was, ankle injury ruled him out.
I reckon I'm going to know who you're going to say.
and obviously, and I think Seri, I think the only reason I don't want to say I don't say Seri is that I think he came in and did exactly what we expected. He came in and we expected him to control the midfield. We expected that midfield maestro. We expected that of him, and he came in and he filled his brief, almost perfectly. Took a little while to settle, but that seems to be more to do with initial managerial communication rather than anything else. But I am going for a January signing.
Okay, so that's not who I thought. Okay.
Who were you thinking that I was going to go
I was thinking Christie. I thought you might have said Christie.
I mean, that is another good shout as well. I am actually suggesting Darlow.
Yeah, it's a good shout.
I just think, and it's not that we had bad keepers, because I think Baxter and Ingram both played their part really well throughout the season, but I think it's not a coincidence that once Darlow came into the side, a lot of our defensive stuff really started to click, and we went on a really good run towards the end of the season where we were picking up lots of points and able to turn what were previously 1-0 losses into the 0-0 draws and those sorts of things. And I remember the other keepers have all pulled off some outstanding saves as well, but I think there were some really world-class saves from Darlow in that back end of the season. And I really do hope that we can do something there to bring him back.
It will be very interesting to see what we do to bring him back. What we'll do now, we'll talk about, we'll round things off talking about favourite game of the season and maybe some thoughts on looking ahead to next season. But before we get to that, I will take this moment to announce our player of the season. Each and every game week, we've been giving our 3-2-1 votes for the most valuable player this season. And despite not being taken as the best summer signing, it is actually gone to Jean-Michel Seri, which surprised me a little bit, only in the sense that we've normally tended to follow the awards pattern of the club. I think as you can see, we had KLP and George Honeyman as our past two winners, which I think married up pretty perfectly with the club awards as well. And you can see it was a pretty tight run thing in the end between Seri, Greaves, Slater, and even Oscar, all being pretty close in the votes. But yeah, Seri takes it out by a single vote. And I think what that probably reflects is, as you were just saying, Dan, about him, is that consistency of performance where, he's come in and filled his brief. He's done what's asked of him, but it's the consistent level of performance that's probably gotten him 1s and 2s each week. He might not have had that many 3s as performances, perhaps, but just that sort of consistent, best 2 or 3 players in any particular game.
Yeah, well, I was just looking at that, and I looked at the Oscar, and I've just said, he was in, didn't seem to perform in the second half of the season. I was like, I wonder how many 3s he got in that first, run of games where he got 8 in 10 or whatever it was.
I reckon he probably got, 40 votes in the first 8 or 9 games, and that was probably about it for him. But yeah, Brad, what are your thoughts on player of the season being Jean-Michel Seri?
Oh, I think, like you said, it probably actually shows a little bit of just about how sort of ebb and flow we were. And I mean, I didn't think of Darlow at all when you were talking about the best signings, but gee whiz, he might have picked up some votes himself in those last few games of the season.
I know I voted for him a few times.
Yeah, well, I bet. And so it just shows you how much, literally a quick pattern of good performances can really make a difference. But in a way, I suppose we've got a lot to be thankful for, that our first probably 13 or 14 players at the club are championship quality players. And so those votes should get spread out a little bit. It's just trying to lift that top 10 player mentality a little bit more. And like we said, I think I haven't seen the exact table in front of me now. I should actually probably bring it up. But I think we literally are like 2.5 games out of the playoffs. And when you think about the season we had and some of those moments where we would have been pulling our hair out,
we ended up 11 off the playoffs, I think, 11 points.
Did we? Right, okay. So let's say
we were pretty close, but only a couple of 2.5 games off top 10.
Yeah, so you start to think, well, hang on a minute, some of those games that we dropped that you were just like, what planet were we on that night? You sort of think, well, hang on a minute, you're only really take a player out, put a player in on that night, and the result might be different. There's certain games you're not going to win or that you're expecting to be up against it. But even some of the draws,
well, the two
Blackburn away,
the
and
red card
like
draws that we had is 4 points dropped.
That's it.
Time.
Yeah. So that's sort of where you start thinking, well, Racine in a full year is not going to be looking at a goal difference you would expect like we had. So therefore, we're going to hopefully pick up, maybe 2 or 3 of those losses become draws under Racine next year, and one more win on top of that, and we're there.
Well, that's probably a good segue, actually, to reflect on what was our favourite performance of the season. I sort of nominated a few. I said to Logan in the first part of this review that my favourite game of the season was actually the 3-2 win over Cardiff, which, of course, Regan Slater pops up and gets 2 goals to spin the game on its head quite quickly. Logan suggested the 4-1 win over Wigan because that was really the game that pulled us away from the relegation zone. I think we'd beaten Birmingham the game before. We were right on the edge with those draws against Blackpool, Sunderland, and that Wigan win, which, funnily enough, that had the 2 Tyler Smith goals in it, was Logan's favourite game. I mean, we've also got the Bristol City win on the opening day with Seri scoring the winner. The 4-4 draw with Sunderland is just pure chaos and fun. But maybe I'll start with you, Dan. What was your favourite game?
I'd actually earmarked the Wigan game as well.
Yeah, well, there you go.
For a couple of reasons. I think it was just about our biggest win of the season. It also there was a game that felt like it was going to be some revenge served up. Like, I feel like I was looking at it before, but I remember it was just like the goals just were coming and coming and coming, and it was just like, are we just going to run away with this and put a cricket score on them here? Because, but didn't quite work out. But it felt like, I feel like the games against Wigan between those had sort of been very like, nah. But this one we were like, we're making a stand. We're going to try and make up for that performance a few
years ago. Yeah, that was a good one. What about you, Brad?
Look, I'm boringly going to pick the Sunderland game because I think your description there about just chaos and manic is great. But I don't know, there's something about going to a big club who think that their proverbial doesn't stink and that we're always the poorer village down the road, so to speak. And even that night, we weren't great. Let's face it, we scored, that's good. But to pinch it in the way we did, and there's something it's a personal thing with me because I love the fact that we've been going to Sunderland for years, even in Steve Bruce's era and so on, and pinching points from them when we have no right. And it was almost like that was another example of that all over again, that yes, okay, we might have got off to a bit of a flyer and it looked like it was going to be a pretty open game, but to score 4 goals away at a team that's been telling everyone all year they'll be top 2. And like I said, I have a personal thing against Sunderland anyway. So for me, that was it. But the Wigan game, to echo both of what you were mentioning about putting your foot down, that was the night for me anyway that I thought, okay, it's all right pinching points here, there and everywhere, but you have to beat the teams you think are below you. And for once, we actually really put our foot down on their neck and said, yeah, we are not a bottom team. So we probably got that little bit of confidence anyway. But I'm going to say Sunderland because of the chaos.
Yeah, absolutely, fair enough. Well, look, I'll round things up then and maybe start with you, Dan. Any final reflections on the season as a whole? Anything in particular you're looking forward to for next season? Final thoughts.
I think just it's interesting how actually 50-50 split our signings were in terms of being successes or failures, because I was thinking about the players that, a Bue failure, Pelkas failure, Connolly, unfortunately, due to injury, failure. Like, there's almost as many that we brought in who did nothing. Woods, another one who really failed to have any significant impact. Figueiredo was a catastrophic failure. And if we can get those right next season, we get the right guys in, then, and I think a year in the division, with getting a better feel for which sorts of players are going to work and which don't, figuring out what sort of personalities you want to bring in as well. I think all of those guys involved in that, Kessler and all those guys, have a better understanding of that now. So I'm looking forward to seeing what signings we make moving forward, because I think, we've talked about it a few times, but we're just a few. We're 2 or 3, and of all those ones that failed, most of them are in the forward line. So fairly indicative of where our issues have been. Otherwise, if we could just sort out the soft tissue injuries, because that killed us this year. I think realistically, Ali out for a big chunk, Tete out for huge amounts, and he was so influential when he was playing. Oscar, out for big chunks. I think even Seri missed a few games here and there, but just seemed like there's big chunks of the season we just couldn't get the consistent 11 or like, you know, the right strike force, you know, together. And how many, especially the last 6 or 8 games where we had no, you know, essentially played Tufan or Pelkas as a number 9 because we didn't have anyone. So if we can sort those couple of issues, I think be looking good next season.
That's it. It's all about the fun margins. It's like Brad's been saying about turning those draws into wins and a couple of the losses into draws. And I think that comes with better personnel. And you can't help but think we do have 70 to 80% of the squad that we need already here. It's just about keeping them fit. But Brad, what are your overall thoughts? We sort of started the episode off with overall thoughts of the season, but what were your final thoughts, I suppose, on the season and looking ahead to next season?
Yeah, look, I mean, like we're sort of saying, if we're 5 to 10% better, we're right in there. And the good thing is, although we talked about strikers or goals or whatever, that's all well and good. But the thing that I probably, in reflection, it didn't hit me till I was actually looking at a few things before tonight, is we have had such a merry-go-round as a club in the last 5 or 6 years. You know, I think we're into our 7th or 8th manager, including part-timers. So if we take Dawson out, I think we're at 6 managers in 6 or 7 years. So we've just got maybe this inkling that the manager we've currently got is that sort of guy that you're going to hold on to for 4 or 5 years. And that's really where the success comes from. It's not going to be instant, but you can go right back to promotion years in the past. We need a manager who looks like they're going to be here for more than just 2 seasons, because then they can shape their squad. They get plenty of time to build momentum and those sorts of things. So I think for us, we've actually finally got something on the managerial front that we've all sort of been craving. And it's not to say he's a local lad itself, but he is the club. He knows the club. He's not just someone who's read about the club. He's been out there and breathed it. And, I mean, a lot of people were still pretty happy with Andy Dawson getting the caretaker role because he loves the club. They know where the intentions are. And I think probably it's proven that you can bring someone in from another league, another country, whatever it may be, and they could be great, but they need to really know how this championship system works. It's a big, long, grinding beast, and it tends to be those clubs that have good squads that get up, and he's got all the chance to build one.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how Rossini goes. It's a great way to bookend this review 2-parter, because Logan and I did start the first part talking about Rossini and the fact that we're now in such a good place with a sort of stable manager, stable squad to go out and really launch into next season, which will be really, really exciting to see. And we'll be back in 4 or 5 weeks to preview the new season. It'll be here before we know it. I'm sure within the month we'll already have a couple of signings in the door. It sounds like the club wants to get on top of things pretty early on to, I guess, give everyone a good pre-season and try to avoid any of those injury issues. But as much as the players will be taking a rest over the summer, we shall be doing so as well. So thank you both for joining me for this review.
Not a problem, mate. Happy to again just think and talk and reflect on the season that was. Good to get some different opinions as well on some of that. It's good to chat with Brad as well. It's been a while.
It has, mate. I feel like I've been in a dark place for a little while, but at least, and hats off to you, Alex, to keep driving this, mate. Like we talked about, you are producer, editor, engineer, auditor,
thank you. Yeah, look, it's always
manager,
a pleasure.
Everything.
It's always a pleasure to do it, and it's always rewarding having you guys jump on. As well as Dan said, it's always great to have different opinions, different things to talk about each and every week. So thank you as well to the listeners at home. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Logan and Mike as well, who Logan on the first part of the episode. Mike was going to join us tonight, but was unable to make it. We'll certainly get him on the preview episode. But this has been the Tigers Down Under for another season. So until next season, come on, City.